So welcome everyone this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. We'll give just another minute or two for people to trickle in. Um,
It's fun to see the number of participants like tack up. I feel
people are
like
here.
it's, I don't know, phone call thing or something like telethon.
Yeah. Okay, we'll give it another minute or two, just allow everyone to come in before we get started. But thanks everyone for joining today. Great, so it's wonderful to see so many familiar names and lots of new names in the list of attendees today. So welcome everyone. My name is Rowan Doran. I am Associate Professor of History at Stanford University. And more importantly, for the purposes of today, I am the chair of the Medieval Academy's Digital Humanities and Multimedia Studies Committee. Our committee advocates for DH and multimedia studies throughout Medieval Academy programming. We're especially proud that after persistent lobbying, we have encouraged Speculum now to solicit reviews of DH work. So thanks to the members of the committee, thanks to the Medieval Academy, and thanks to everyone on the Speculum editorial board for seeing that through. We're excited to see that come to fruition as having been a long-standing desideratum of the medieval DH community for the Medieval Academy. And more generally, our committee helps to build community and foster best practices within the medieval DH community in the United States and beyond, through panels at Kalamazoo, through a dedicated coffee break at the Medieval Academy's annual meeting. I hope I will see some of you there, and through webinars like this, the inaugural event of our year-long Centennial Digital Humanities Showcase, part of the Medieval Academy's 100th anniversary celebrations. So today, like for all of the showcases planned for the year, we'll be featuring two ongoing or recently completed DH projects. We'll have brief presentations of the projects, their development or future aspirations, and then that will be followed by an open Q&A with the audience. So all of you should note that somewhere on your Zoom apps, there is a Q&A button, so feel free to type in any questions you may have as you run along. You can also go save them to the end, but if you don't want to forget them, type them into the Q&A, and then when we get to the open discussion at the end, I will call on you or read out your question as appropriate. So to get things moving along, we'll get started here with our first two presenters. It's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Carrie Beneš, Professor of History at New College, Florida. Professor Beneš is a distinguished historian of late medieval Italy and a winner of the Rome Prize, among other honors. In addition to the DH work that she'll be discussing today, her scholarship regularly explores the many ways the late medieval people put memories of the classical world to work. The other speaker for the first presentation will be Laura Morreale, which is just about a household name among DH-inclined medievalists, or should be. An endlessly creative scholar of the French cultural presence in the medieval Mediterranean, a visionary advocate for independent scholars, a blazing force in pre-modern digital humanities, and as you can tell from this intro, one of my oldest and dearest friends in the field. She co-directs, along with Professor Beneš, Amanda Madden, and Laura Ingallinella, the Sfera project, which she and Professor Beneš will be talking about today. Over to you.
Wow, that was exciting. Thanks, Rowan. I hope I can live up to that. So thank you to Rowan and members of the Digital Humanities and Multimedia Studies Committee for having us today. We're really honored to have a platform to introduce the Sfera project and to let you know about recent and ongoing developments. Next slide, please. The first thing some of you may be asking is, what is La Sfera? It's an Italian language poem written in the first few decades of the 15th century by Gregorio or Goro Dati, a Florentine silk merchant, diarist, and civic historian who was also heavily involved in city politics at the turn of the 15th century. Composed in ottava rima, this concise yet compelling set of verses introduces readers to late medieval cosmology, astrology, natural science, navigation, and geography. All of these were essential topics for Florentine businessmen engaged in long-distance trade, the professional occupation of the author, and many of his hometown's most powerful residents. Now, Dati's poem, comprising 4 36-stanza books, was so well circulated and duplicated in his day that nearly 170 early print and manuscript copies of the poem are extant, the majority of which were made within decades of the work's composition in we think about 1420. Now, of these nearly 170 copies, several are richly illustrated with diagrams, maps, and beautiful images. We'll show you some of those today, while others remain unadorned and include only the poem itself. A work of such great popularity, in whatever form it was reproduced, provides insight into the interests and values of La Sfera's initial readers, whose worldview was naturally profoundly shaped by the values of 15th century Florence. Next slide, please. If we take a quick glance at how the work was organized, we see that Book 1 sets out the basics of cosmology, astronomy, and astrology. Book 2 explains their role in shaping earthly natural phenomena such as humors, weather, seasons, and tides. Book 3 sets out the geography of the continents and the mechanics of sea travel, sea travel, including the various winds and techniques for navigation. And Book 4 presents an itinerary of Mediterranean and Black Sea ports. Next slide, please. If we follow the itineraries plotted in this last section in Book 4, what some have called a verbal portalon, we see how Dati has mapped out Florentine trade interests to their full extension, from the west all the way to the furthest reaches of the Black Sea. We'll return to this mapping element in just a moment, but for now I'm going to pass the screen on to Carrie.
Thank you, Laura. So one thing that really interested us was that despite the text's 15th century popularity and the many copies that still exist in both early print and manuscript versions, the La Sfera tradition has until recently received very little scholarly attention. To date, there has been no critical edition of the text, and only a single 19th century printed edition based on a single manuscript witness. But also, the work doesn't transfer very well to print, since in a majority of manuscripts, Dati's poetic text is accompanied by maps, diagrams, and illustrations that are integral to understanding La Sfera as the verses themselves. So we started out knowing that there were a lot of copies out there, but not quite how many, and we kept finding more the more we looked. We found one Paris BNF copy by following a trail of handwritten notes to a digitized manuscript, but that was labeled simply another copy of Ital 1076. And Ital 1076 happens to be a copy of La Sfera, but there's no author, no title, nothing that would lead you there. In another instance, random Googling led me to the National Library of Poland, which it turns out maintains several black and white photos of a copy of La Sfera from an exhibition done in the 1930s. The photos don't match any known copy of La Sfera, and we have no idea where the actual manuscript is now, if it even still exists. So there were all of these manuscripts out there, and there were occasional studies involving one or another single manuscript, but the corpus as a whole had somehow escaped broader scholarly attention.
This, however, all changed when the text was used as the basis for 2 online crowdsourced transcription events that took place from May to July 2020 and brought together over 70 scholars from across the globe in this pandemic era manuscript-based online transcription. And I know that some of you out there were participants in that. During these efforts, participants collaboratively transcribed a total of 8 different copies of La Sfera from digitized images of manuscripts housed in repositories located here in the United States, in Italy, in France, and in England, in all sorts of libraries. Here you can see some of the fun that we had with these events. We have a Tower of Babel from the Newberry Library's copy, recreated in Lego on the left and in rhubarb pound cake on the right. If you all remember, we were kind of bored, as well as a landing page where team members created blog posts to track the difficulties they had with their transcriptions, or just to note discoveries that they found as they worked with the digitized manuscript images. Now, I've spoken about these challenges a lot, so I'm not going to go into the logistics, but suffice it to say that by the time we had finished interacting so closely with the digital versions of these manuscripts, Many of us wanted to learn more about La Sfera, why it was written, who had copied it, all these kinds of questions that we as medievalists asked. The transcription events had created an intellectual community, the Sferisti, who wanted to know more about these very beautiful manuscripts and the poem that had inspired their creation. This led to a series of La Sfera spin-offs starting in late 2020.
The first of these, which came directly out of the La Sfera Challenge, was the first ever translation of La Sfera into English. This was an effort completed over the course of 2 years by a team of 7 scholars working exclusively online using a collaborative translation platform. This will be published this spring by Italica Press in a format that features the Italian original and the English translation side by side, as well as facing page illustrations that highlight the interplay between the poem and the many diagrams and maps used to illustrate concepts and place names in the text. We're thinking of it kind of as an anti-facsimile, since our goal was to offer reproductions of as broad a range of manuscript images as possible to showcase the diversity of the overall corpus, from highly illuminated deluxe manuscript like the Vatican manuscript you see here, to scrawled personal copies like the one copied in teeny tiny triple columns on board a ship from Constantinople to Venice in 1463. We also got really interested in the marginal maps, me especially. We realized early on that there was a standard program of 12 maps covering roughly the same areas, but it quickly became clear that the images and labels on the maps varied wildly. So we organized an online event through the Marco Institute in 2021 to plot all the place names mentioned in the poem. From there, we expanded to transcribing all the place names on all the maps, a set overlapping but not identical to the place names mentioned in the poem. And we've used that data both to aid stemmatization, that is, identifying related manuscripts within this large corpus, and to create a gazetteer for our digital edition so that maybe we can help people who are confused by Larissa versus La Raza, or who don't know that Nife, when it appears on a medieval map, is better known nowadays as Casablanca. This is probably a good place to note that the varied elements of this corpus, the visual, the textual, the cartographic, have given us really great material to experiment with a wide variety of the digital tools, including Carta, Recogito, Palladio, NodeGoat, ArcGIS, IIIF/Mirador, Tropy, and so on, not to mention sites like the World Historical Gazetteer and linked open data resources. So we have lots of thoughts about those if people have questions in the Q&A.
And finally, the third spin-off project, which concerns the diagrams included in many of the La Sfera manuscripts, such as those that plot the heavens or illustrate how a lunar eclipse occurs. In response to these, a digital tool and user-friendly interface is in development to collect and transcribe these diagrams, turning them into computer-readable SVGs. Using this tool would allow us to create databases of transcribed diagrams so that we can compare individual illustrations within a textual corpus or across multiple textual corpora. For all of these efforts, and this is very important for the digital work that we do, next slide please, we've assiduously cataloged the online projects along the way. That is, we provided a narrative for what occurred and collected, made public, and deposited in a public repository all the data that was created during these projects. By cataloging what has been done in these various La Sfera projects, we've made our data open and accessible, but have also been able to provide a DOI for all the project participants, which links the documentation to their CVs and grants credit for the work that they have done. So that's important.
The next phase of the project, which has been funded for more than 2 consecutive years now by the National Endowment for the Humanities under the Scholarly Editions and Translations program, will take the work that we've done previously and create a new interactive digital edition, which uses the flexibility of the digital medium to showcase La Sfera's intertwined images, maps, and texts. Given the possibilities afforded by technologies such as IIIF, image and text annotation, geospatial analysis, and linked open data, the digital medium is actually much better suited than traditional print to present Dotti's work in its entirety. So I am now going to try to give you a little tour of the site in development. This is very much a work in progress, so it's not as shiny and polished as we hope it will be later on, but it'll give you a good sense of the kinds of things we're trying to do. see if I can make this work. Hey, here we are. So here is the front page, which currently has a kind of a gallery of a whole bunch of, just to give you a sense of the variety of the illustrations in the corpus. Here's our welcome materials. Here is the edition page, which currently has the Italian on the left, the English with annotations in the middle, and a Mirador viewer, which enables us to...
This is super new.
Yeah, this is brand new. We just got this working. Here we go. All right, so here is Herblat 752. And so you can line up the text and the text over here. If you go one page forward, you can see the map of the diagram of the cosmos that goes with this section right here. And hopefully we're going to try and get that alignment working better, where anytime you're looking at a certain part of the poem, you see a folio that goes with that. If we jump over to the Gazetteer, it gives you a map of all of the places mentioned in the various manuscripts and in the text. So for example, if I click on Alexandria here, it shows me a nice little green thing. And I think that's this one over here. And if we click on the Alexandria page, it gives us a whole bunch of a bunch of different spellings of how Alexandria appears. It gives us a lat long. It has an authority file to Pleiades. And ultimately, it's going to point you to all of the manuscripts in which Alexandria appears, which is a lot of them, and also where it appears in the text. So if you jump to book 4, stanza 12, line 6, that should take us back to, oh, here we are, Alexandria. And I should mention that the search is fuzzy, so you can kind of type things in and see what happens. And the only other thing I'm gonna give you, sorry, here, go up. So we also have a resources page where we're going to put pedagogical resources and stuff like that. And here is our current list of manuscripts, and we've got lots of metadata in there about them. So that gives you a really quick overview of what it looks like at the moment. It's going to be prettier later. Laura, do you want to add anything before we move on?
No, just that, this took us a lot of thinking through to get where we are. Yeah.
Many Excel spreadsheets.
Many Excel spreadsheets. And so, Carrie, you want to finish up with what's next for us?
Yep, what's next? Okay, so we are part of our plan and part of the NEH project is to create not only an edition, but an extensible edition that will enable new transcriptions and newly found manuscripts to be integrated into the corpus through our interactive website. We're going to build out the pedagogical section of the website. We've got some art historical analysis that's coming along to do with decoration in the manuscripts, types of cartography, analysis of buildings, stuff like that. And then probably along the way, there's going to be collaborative publication, whether that's a journal special edition or an edited volume or what, we don't really know yet. So, all right, Laura.
So just to summarize and sort of put this in a package, what Carrie and I would like to underscore, and when we talked about this presentation, is that what's amazing too about this project is how it comes in and out of the digital space. You've seen that we have a translation, that it's going to be print version, that we've got sort of visual stuff. We've had crowdsourcing stuff, and so I just want to I think this project does a really good job of saying that digital work is not an either or proposition. It's not either you have a digital project or you don't, but rather it's a tool that can help us move in and out of those audiences and those scholarly spaces where our work can thrive in a lot of different places. So I'd love to talk more with you all about that, and also obviously about any of the questions about the project. And with that, we will leave you and say thank you so much.
Thanks to both of you for that wonderful presentation and the wonderful project. There don't seem to be any sort of like urgent questions at this point, so we'll again sort of save the discussion until afterwards. And we will now pass on to our next presenter, Professor Martin Foys, who is the Nancy C. Hoofs Professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Many of you who, like me, are sort of Bayou Tapestry fans. Here's my little sort of like Bayou Tapestry cocktail napkins ever ready in my office. Might know him best as a remarkably innovative scholar on that enigmatic embroidery. But he has also made path-breaking contributions across a wide range of topics in medieval literary and cultural studies. And most relevant for today is the fact that Professor Foys has been doing the theory and practice of digital humanities in medieval studies since the early 90s, indeed well before it was even called digital humanities. And today he'll be talking to us about his ongoing Old English Poetry in Facsimile project, which he launched about a decade ago and brings together many strands of his long engagement with DH. Over to you, Professor Foys.
Thank you so much. You guys can all hear me, I hope. And great. Okay, we're going to get going. I'm going to be a little more informal. I hope that's okay. But first of all, thank you very much, Rowan, and indeed the entire Medieval Academy Digital Humanities and Multimedia Studies Committee for inviting me. It's a great honor and so exciting to be getting to present at the inaugural event of this. I've thrown in the chat a set of links. The first is to the actual project, Old English Poetry in Facsimile. The second is to an article, a recent article I had published about, it kind of lays out in more detail the kind of theory and methodology of the project. And then finally, a link to the actual authoring platform that houses this, the digital MAPA platform, if you want to know anything about any of that. And if you just get bored with me, just go off to the Old English Poetry site and play around. You'll probably get just as much out of it. Okay, so as Rowan mentioned, the Old English Poetry and Facsimile project is a 10-year project. We're about 7 years in right now, and we're about 86% finished. And when I say we, it's me and a whole team of contributing editors, almost more than a dozen at this point. If we jump over here to the works completed, you can kind of get a sense of how much we've done here. 314 editions, almost 24,000 lines done. That's in the OEPF. That's 77% of the entire Old English poetic corpus. If we fold in the electronic Beowulf and Dan O'Donnell by Kevin Kiernan, and Dan O'Donnell's Cadman's Hymn, that brings us up to 87.5%. I probably won't be doing Beowulf until I've done everything else, if I ever do it, because Kevin's done such a good job on this already. And that gives us about 86% of our work currently done. You can kind of scroll through and see, here's all the new digital editions we have done of these works. So I just realized I messed up my slides by doing this now, but that's okay. So to give you a kind of sense of what's included in all this, I thought I'd give you a very quick Dreadit live demo of everything that's here, right? So we've got all sorts of, basically everything that occurs in Old English poetry we've got for you. We've got canonical stuff like, the Dream of the Rood. And so we'll just kind of call up a real quick opening moment of that. We've got epic stuff like all of the Junius 11 manuscript, including all of the 2,800 lines of Genesis. Sorry, let me just get my things closed here. We've got obscure stuff. I'll open up one real quick thing for you. We've got, while I'm right here, we've got objects. So for instance, runic stones with their runic transcriptions and transliterations. We've got the riddles, we've got the Psalms, we've got multi-witness chronicle verse. I'll show up one of those real quick to kind of give you a sense of what they look like. So the capture of the 5 boroughs occurs in 5 different witnesses of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and you can open up every single version of those witnesses to compare and contrast them. While we're here, I'll show you some real quick ideas of the platform as well. Because it's a multi-witness text, you can click on any moment to see all the different variations of the orthography and spelling of the works. So if you want to see all the different ways Old English scribes would have spelled König, it's all right here for you. And then, you know, and a whole host of other things I'm not going to go into, but obviously we've got it all here. I'll show you one last example of something that uses layers, which is a particularly useful thing for us as well. We've got nearly destroyed manuscripts like the Boethian meters, and then using the layers feature, we also are able to bring in the UV images from Kevin Kiernan's defunct electronic Boethius project as well, which he has generously shared with us. So lots, you know, basically we got it all. So just to kind of give a very quick overview then of how this all works as these particular editions, I'll open up another canonical one from the extra book and just give you a real quick sense of what the kind of format and function of these digital editions are before getting into the methodology of them. So we'll open up the third page of the Seafarer for us right here. So here we go. Whoops, I opened up the fourth page. So as you can see, each edition is really two editions. You've got a traditional transcripted edition, similar to what you would see in a print edition. And then you've also got a digital facsimile edition of the actual, not the actual, but a representation of the manuscript, a version of the manuscript or the object, depending on what we are looking at here. This is by design. It creates a kind of symmetry between these two editions. So you'll see that everything that is coded in, color-coded in the print edition or the transcription edition, it also shows up as a colored link and highlight in the transcription edition. And then these are both linked to the same exact note describing things. There's a very easy shorthand to understand what's going on visually in these editions. If something is in blue, it is simply something that has an editorial history. People have amended it in the past, have discussed amending it, these sorts of things. If it's in bold, it's an emendation that our edition, the Old English Poetry and Facsimile edition, has made. And so this kind of gives you very quickly the ability to see what have been the interpretive cruxes, what have been the editorial discussions going on, but then also which ones are amended in this particular edition versus which ones have been amended in the past but are not being amended now. So you've got this kind of symmetrical situation. You've also got, you can also arrange it in all sorts of ways. So you can have a triptych kind of style of view. You can organize it in a number of different layouts as well. So the other thing I wanted to kind of note here is if you look up top, you'll see that you've got a set of document numbers here. And what that is you are able to also kind of curate a specific persistent link to a set of objects and texts being displayed. If you just kind of click on this little share document link here, you'll see you get the a whole link for this particular document. You can then add on additional documents in order to be able to create a link that takes you right to these particular moments in the whole edition. This is extraordinarily useful as Laura and Carrie were talking about, the kind of way in which the digital needs to be able to reach out beyond its own project to things that are both digital and not digital. This is a way to kind of be able to incorporate particular specific aspects of this project into citationally into other digital publications and even non-digital publications if you wanted to, and it kind of opens it up, allowing things to be connected in all sorts of ways that I think are quite useful. All right, so it also is deliberately set up here to produce a closer dialogue between what we consider to be the traditional modern edition of a medieval text, and the medieval material version of that actual edition. When I was beginning out in graduate school in North America in the early 90s, the idea of actually even consulting a manuscript or being able to access the manuscript version of an Old English poem was something that was just not simply a priority. There was a general idea that, you had everything you needed in the modern, clean, shiny printed edition. So this is very much about building a bridge between what we have done in the past traditionally and what we can do now with the affordances of digital technology and digital humanities. So for instance, you'll kind of note, and I always have to say this because it comes up in every single talk if I don't. The transcription edition of OEPF preserves a lot of those older conventions and formatting, right? So we have the half lines, we have the caesura, we have all the line numbers and these sorts of things. We preserve a lot of the modern editorial punctuation that and other diacritics, that kind of modern intervention, to make this material more accessible to beginning users of it. And another huge plank of the Old English Poetry and Facsimile Project is accessibility. We want this to be something that is useful, not simply for experienced scholars in the field, but also people who are just coming to Old English or just learning about Old English. To that end, every edition not simply has the transcription and facsimile edition, but it also comes with a translation, most of them generously provided by Ophelia Erin Hofstetter from her Old English Poetry Project. Though I will point out, Ophelia never got around to doing the Psalms, and so I have been translating so many Psalms for this project as well. Because the Old English Psalms, there's 100 of them. It's also one of the largest groups of Old English poetry, and also one of the most rarely studied. And so it's kind of good to be able to have much more cleaner access to this whole group of poetry as well. And I've been diligently translating all 100 of these Psalms as we go along. Okay. Also then, what else do we want to kind of think about here? The methodology of this project is centered on this concept that I call restorative retention, right? So if you take a look at this edition of the Sfera, you'll see everything in blue is something that somebody in one of the past major editions since ASPR forward, since the Anglo-Saxon Poetic Records forward, has chosen to amend. And then you'll see that our project chooses to amend a lot fewer of these things. This is because emendations have historically happened for a whole host of reasons, right? There's been a desire to normalize and regularize a text to make it more accessible and understandable. There's been the kind of heavy-handed hegemony of classical Old English meter, which kind of dictates that something is considered metrically quote unquote deficient. It can be remedied, it can be fixed, it can be, a word can be amended to make it more metrically suitable to the theories of meter. There's smoothing out of dialect. There's the erasure of late Old English, weakening of inflectional forms. All of these things are reasons why people have amended. What we like to do at Old English Poetry and Facsimile Project is adopt the process of amending as a last resort, amending when it is clearly a mistake, when it is nonsensical, when it is creating a word that literally doesn't exist in Old English, these sorts of things. And so we end up amending a lot less, because what we are able to do then is preserve the linguistic diversity, the formal diversity, the metrical diversity of so many of these texts that prior emendations have elided or kind of silenced, right? And so, but the other thing that we do here, I'll give you one quick example of this. So here's a great example, right? So the Exeter book is full of these Old English words that appear to be third person third person singular present ending in an E thorn or an EF ending, that actually should be plural in these contexts, right? And so a lot of editors have gone through and amended that word, the stone death, to stone dath, the plural form. But what's really funny about that is that these sorts of this sort of weakening of the ES to or AS to ES forms happens a lot in Old English. In fact, the Exeter book is full of examples of these things, and so you can kind of see them here happening over and over and over again. So there's a number of reasons that each note will kind of go through to be like, okay, here's why people have amended it in the past, but here's why we are not amending it. The other thing that these notes then do is build an editorial archaeology for you, right? Every major edition, going back to the ASPR editions, are noted for these works, and you get to see exactly who's chosen to amend what, and if I can also produce a why for why these have been amended. And then I kind of give you the effect of the amendation, and then I give you, if we're not amending, the defense for not amending, for retaining, right? And I'll just show you one more example of that I always like to kind of call up here from the beginning of the Dream of the Rood. It's sort of one of my favorite moments to do it. So we'll open up the Dream of the Rood edition from the Vercelli book. We'll go to the very opening page. And we'll see here down around line, 17B. We got Whale Distrayala, right? And here it is, Whale Distrayala here. We got a little note kind of talking about that for us right here. We see that a whole bunch of previous editors have amended, but only one, Michael Swanton, retains it. And what's interesting about this is it's been amended almost certainly for meter, right? Amending it from Wayaldis forest to Wayaldendis rulers. It's a little stronger, perhaps semantically as well, the kind of idea that this is the Lord's tree, or the but Wayaldis works perfectly fine too, the tree of the forest. And in fact, it's only metrically quote unquote deficient if you discount the idea that this could be a much older poem. We know it has aspects of it from the Rothel Cross dating from several centuries earlier, and that oftentimes you have words with diphthongs in them that can be archaically broken. And indeed, in fact, we see that there's a number of these examples also happening in the Vercelli book. And in fact, if you did a kind of quick search using the search feature that's also available up here, maybe not off your screen slightly, you'll find all sorts of examples of these diphthongs that are being counted as disyllabic in Old English poetry that perhaps you don't need to amend, perhaps you do need to keep it, and perhaps, as I like to say here, that perhaps you don't want to miss the forest for the trees of editorial emendations and normalization. That's sort of the kind of overview of this project, but I do want to kind of just then give a couple of minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, to some ideas about the development of it too, as we were asked to do. One important thing to note is that we kind of had to build a platform to make this work. I was very lucky that we were building a platform called Digital Mappa early on. Long before I envisioned this project, to be able to kind of curate digital collections of images and texts. And that development of that project led me to the kind of realization of what I could perhaps achieve in the editing of Old English poetry and facsimile. Kind of now that we have available all these digital facsimiles online, being able to kind of produce a new kind of edition that takes advantage of that within this environment of being able to link from specific moments on moments of a text to the same specific moments to on images, and being able to connect them together, right? So if you just click on this, you can go right to that particular moment on the manuscript page. And then also the ability to create the citationality, the granular citationality of this, so that any of these moments can then just be put together into a URL and cite it in another piece of scholarship is important. It was also interesting because we chose to do this iteratively. This is a 10-year project, right? I've been working on this for 7 years, but we chose from almost the beginning to just begin to make it available online, even when we only had 20 or 30 editions at the beginning. And that's been extraordinarily useful because it's helped build a kind of momentum. People see this, they get interested in it. I've gotten contributing editors and collaborators who are just kind of reach out and are like, I want to learn how to do this. I want to be a part of this. So that's always kind of very interesting. But at the same time, it produced a challenge because the methodology of this wasn't set when we began. It took me, a couple years of working on this kind of editing to realize that I needed this kind of theory of restorative retention to really realize what I wanted to realize in this project. And it took the work to kind of get me to the theory. And that led to a bunch of recursive revision in the early editions to kind of bring them up to speed with our current methodologies as well. I'll also kind of note that though we have the ability in OEPF and Digital MAPA to link to IIIF or link to the web or upload locally. We do almost all of our images locally because it was really instructive when the British Library went down and their manuscripts were unavailable. Old English Poetry Facsimile became one of the sites that people would come to because you could still get access to some of the British Library manuscripts, at least of the poems that we had edited, and come to it and be able to still access that material. So that's pretty important. At the same time, when the British Library came back online, they had changed all their URLs. So even if we were just linking to them through URLs, they didn't make them persistent. And so all that work would have to be redone again. Also, three final things here to kind of just note. Accessibility is sort of the watchword for this project in terms of trying to make all this material accessible, but at the same time, the interface itself is not fully accessible yet. And we have a series of grants working to kind of bring the actual interface up now that all the core functionality has been finished, to bring the digital MAPA interface up to speed in terms of universal access, in terms of the way it can be connected as well. It's really the last big stage in this 15-year development of the platform to finally finish it with the idea that it will kind of conform to digital accessibility standards as well. A point about sustainability as well here. You have the option here in any digital MAPA project to export the entire thing. And when you do that, it'll export an entire archive file with just basic HTML and JPEG representations of the entire project, right? And so what this allows, and this is kind of what it looks like when you've exported it as an archive. And what this allows you to do is it kind of ensures that all this work here is going to be accessible in some way past the viability of the actual platform. Having all this work that preserves, frankly, about 95% of the content and functionality of the actual edition, but just in HTML and JPEGs is pretty great. I wouldn't want to have to edit in this way or even use it in this way, but you can still access all of the content, all of the notes, all of the material that is available, right? So if you have a note on something here, here it all is, right? And so this allows, like, long past the time that I'm gone and this project is finished and the digital map is no longer something that can work, this ensures that the basic raw materials of this project can still be accessed along with an SQL data dump, so that someone else can come along and reboot it up in a new format so it can remain sustainable for much longer time than a decade or two of its viability in this particular format. And then finally, I just want to note that this is, though I've done so much work on this and I'm the driving force of it, it cannot happen with me. It literally almost takes a village to build this. I have had over a dozen contributing editors and collaborators, many of whom were also graduate students while they were doing this. And it's very important to note that this kind of work, this kind of collaborative work, has to be a two-way street. It's so important that the graduate students who are becoming contributing editors were getting something out of this as well, as opposed to just doing labor. There always has to be labor and learning when you're doing this kind of work. And so I spend most of my research funds each year hiring my experienced graduate students who have learned how to do this. They get experience by doing a practicum for credit through UW-Madison. So they're getting credit, graduate credit to do this kind of work. And then secondly, they're getting paid to do this kind of work. This summer, we're losing about 3 of my experienced PhD editors, and we're going to have one last big kind of send-off. We're going to edit the last 1,600 lines of the Exeter book edition of the Exeter book to kind of complete all of the 4 major codices of it as well. And I kind of reached out to them this past week to be like, are we ready to do one last ride into the sunset? And they were all like, we're in. So we're going to finish up on the Exeter book, which I think is a great way to go out for some of the editors who have been here since the beginning. And then finally, I'll just note that this project couldn't happen without support from originally from the National Endowment for the Humanities that funded the development of the digital MAPA platform, from the Andrew Mellon Foundation, and then also some big internal grants from UW-Madison to kind of allow this work to continue. And it's all available online right now. Take it, tell people about it, cite it, and then in about another 3 years, it'll be completely finished. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin, for that. What a wonderful project, what a heroic amount of work. And I think these 2 projects are wonderful complements to each other. In one case, a huge weight of an editorial tradition that one must sort of grapple with and make visible. And the other, a huge number of manuscripts with no editorial tradition that one must sort of make visible to so many. So we already have one question from Lisa Fagan-Davis for Martin. Bringing up basically the emendations made by past editors, often passing by without a justification or even a note, and the challenges that you faced in trying to figure out why past editors made the decisions they made. So much of the work you've done for this project, obviously, is trying to actually translate the intricacies of philological critical apparatuses to people who may be encountering this for the first time. So can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lisa. Thank you. And I'll point out Lisa Fagan-Davis, massive props to Lisa for everything she's done in Medieval Academy, of course, but also one of the earliest adapters of the digital MAPA platform way back in 2009. So a heroic pioneer in a number of ways. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, so one of the phrases I write the most often in these notes and that my contributing editors are trained to write is the phrase "without comment," because so many past editors just made a change. And then you're like, oh, why did they do it? And you look back in the notes and there's no comment. And because for them, it was obvious, but when you're a beginning student of Old English or even an experienced student of Old English, it might not be obvious why you would need to amend this or why you would need to change it. And so it's always very interesting because there is some detective work sometimes. I do a lot of, after without comment comes a comma, and then it's like, presumably on the assumption of blah, 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 because, like you try to imagine, well, it seemed obvious to them. And I'm at the point now as an experienced editor, it's even kind of obvious to me why you would want to change it. But I want it to be available to the people that it's not obvious to, because that's a form of gatekeeping, right? To just be like, oh, well, it should be this, and you should know enough to know why it should be this. So this project is about kind of trying to open up those gates a little to tell people why people would have amended it, and then also be like, well, here's a bunch of reasons for why maybe we wouldn't amend it. Here are all the arguments, and then ultimately you can make your decision about whether you want to amend or not. But yeah, doing that editorial archaeology sometimes takes some also editorial imagination. Absolutely right.
Great. We have another question from a grad representative, Rebecca Hart, asking the Sfera team to speak a bit more about the DOI creation and how to build a CV of participants in a concrete way. And I was wondering if I could sort of piggyback a question of my own for your crew on that, which is, in Martin's case, it's kind of a classic sort of PI-driven project. Yours is a sort of 4-person sort of team-led project. And so I was wondering if you could think also, as you think about sort of the DOI side in this question of acknowledging contributions, could you be a bit more about how it works to lead a multi-person led project of your sort?
Laura,
So
do you want to speak to the DOI stuff, and then I'll sort of talk about the amoeba?
Exactly, yeah. The DOI situation comes out of just sort of a general theory about how we need to document our digital work. And one of the reasons that we need to do that is that we need to be able to create places where people who are building their CVs can point to the work they've done. And you can look at the digital documentation process, which is listed on the Medieval Academy site for how that's done. But the point simply is that we need to come to terms with the ephemerality of much of digital work, which is why I'm so glad to see, Martin, that you've got that export option. I think previously, is that new? I think that's probably new.
Yeah, that was, yeah, I basically got another grant internally, and it was a plank that I had been dying to get to, but we had to build all the core functionality first, and then we got that done, and now, yeah, that's came in about 3 months ago, the exporting and the granular citation.
I'm so pleased to see it. But yeah, I mean, the point is that you do all this work, and if it's gone because the platform no longer works, that means, all that work you've done as a graduate student or as a member of a team, you can't point to that on your CV. So that's something that really motivated myself and the people who are working on the digital documentation process to create that and to get people to think about, one of the things that you need to do when you're doing digital work is to document it and to put it somewhere safe so that it won't sort of disappear into thin air.
And just before Professor Beneš starts, I have just posted into the chat the link to the fabulous digital documentation process, which was developed by Laura Morreale and is a fantastic tool. In fact, I would say an almost necessary tool for anybody embarking on DH projects to ensure that even if you don't use this project, you have thought about all the things that Laura wants you to think about.
So, sure. Yes, the Sfera challenge, I mean, it started as a crowdsourced, anyone who wants to participate can participate kind of a thing. And even once the challenges were over, it kept going that way, because the group that was left over at that point was the group of people who were like, oh, we think this is really interesting and we have so many questions. And so it was really a very collaborative process where some people were like, well, here, this is the question I'm really interested in, and this is the question I'm really interested in. And we really adopted I'm not even sure I'm going to call it a policy from very early on, that whoever was interested in a particular thing was welcome to take the lead on that thing. So I was completely obsessed with the maps. And everyone else said, yeah, sure, take the lead on the maps. And I would go away and I would think about the maps. And at some point I would say, well, I actually need some help, doing some data entry or thinking about some stuff. And people would just I would put out a call and people would be like, oh yeah, sure, I can help with that. So it's really always been very, I don't know, opportunistic in a sense. And, or we had ECRs who were working with us, and one of them was like, oh, well, here, I've always wanted to present at this conference. Would anybody like to present on this conference with me? And some of us said, yeah, sure, let's do that. And so we did a collaborative paper for that. Obviously, when we got to the point of putting in the NEH proposal, they're much more structured. And we had to come up with a PI and a project director. But even there, I think our former processes really stayed kicked in, because I ended up as project director just because my institution was submitting the grant. And instead of having one project director, we had 4, just for different eras, just to keep tabs on different things. But really, it's always been a very, very collaborative process. And it's something that really would not have been possible before the advent of Zoom, Google Docs, all of these collaborative digital tools, Slack, that enable people to really keep in touch and share material and bounce ideas back and forth. I think that's been a really key development.
Open to other questions from the floor. I have lots, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation. Oh yes, great. From Wendy, here we go. Have you had any experience using these digital projects or in classroom settings, like using OEPF as a primary textbook or pedagogy plans with Sfera?
Can I keep talking very briefly?
Yes, keep going.
I have totally done this. I have now used Sfera with, I think, 3 different classes, actually more than that, maybe 5 different classes of undergraduates. And in some cases, it's simply using the text and our translation and sort of talking about the process. Sometimes it's been, here, I'm still transcribing maps. You guys can help. let's have a transcription event. Laura has collaborated with me on a couple of those. And we're actually now to the point where we need really particular coherent things done. I actually have 8 RAs lined up for the spring term, which are a group of students a group of students from a class that I was teaching last term who all said, oh yeah, I would love to do this. So yeah, undergraduates love this stuff. And I actually developed a whole class kind of building off it where I reimagined my Renaissance and Reformation survey as Renaissance and Reformation, the world in maps. So it's worked really well.
And it sounds like you will be leading a workshop in Leeds. Is that correct?
I will, yes. One of the digital medievalist workshops on maps and mapping.
Martin, thoughts on?
Yeah. I mean, I teach Old English every year, and it's been great. The more additions I have in here, the more I can just, like, when I'm teaching, when we get to meter, when we get to the Old English poetry section, being able to kind of just call this stuff up, because at that point the students know enough Old English to kind of know some of the stakes and what can happen to the texts. And so to be able to just call them up and show them the actual word as it's written, which I think is a lot different. You know, if you look at a printed edition and, you know, it's like it's been changed and then there's a, like in the footnote down there or the, you know, the criticus at the back, you know, it's like, oh, well, it was this, but now it's this. That, like, centering the change text and then like literally relegating the original text to the margin, that has a palpable effect on the kind of authority of the editor versus the authority of the text. And when you can kind of put them up and for students and in a kind of a editorial format and be like, but it's actually, you know, look at the word as it's actually written right here. Why do we need to change it? And then showing them the notes and everything. They are then all inspired for their final projects when they're doing their own a translation of a piece of Old English text to kind of like think about those cruxes much more deeply than just like, oh, well, previous editors have done this. They're encouraged to kind of think about, do we need to change it or can we keep it?
Laura.
I may, yeah, Martin, that's such a great point. And I will just say that one of the plans that we have to finish off the edition project, the digital edition project, is something we're calling an extensible edition. Because we have 160 plus manuscripts, we'd like to get some more of these manuscript images up there and put a platform together where a class, an Italian class or a medieval studies class, could take, you know, have your own copy of the La Sfera and do your own transcription. And what's great is that since we already have the edition and, you know, transcription up there, you can cheat and do that. But the point is that, as you're saying, they're engaging with that, you know, one-on-one interaction with the manuscript, which I think inspires people to feel like they're doing some real work, right? And so that extensible edition is going to be the last piece of the puzzle for our digital edition.
And Laura, while you have the floor, do you want to answer Nat Westerby's comment or question here about how this makes you think about traditional academic disciplines across collaboration across lines? Has collaborating changed how you think about things? I've always thought of you as someone who has sort of no time for disciplines anyways. You have questions and ideas, but...
Well, you know, what I will say is I wanted to mention something that Martin mentioned previously about how he had to do the work to get to the theory. And I think maybe this is a little bit answering that question, is that there have been pathways before you learn the theory and then you apply it. But I think in digital humanities, I think in, you know, digital medieval studies, a lot of times you get in there and you try something and you try to, you know, retrofit a medieval way of thinking about things into a modern way, and it doesn't work, right? And so it makes you think and rethink what you're actually doing. So I would say that process, that, you know, digital process, that digital humanities process, does do the work of crossing those more traditional approaches, the more traditional methodologies. And I would love to hear what other people who, you know, in the audience have to say about that, whether they've had that same experience.
We're almost out of time, but Carrie, last word over to you.
Just to think about Matt's question a little bit, it's done both, because on the one hand, having so many different people, from programmers, archivists, art historians, historians, linguists, having so many different people with different expertise involved in this project has made me really grateful for the people who have expertise I do not have. And to respect, the people who have formal art historical training or formal linguistic training, which I don't have, and I'm glad that they can do that. On the other hand, it's also really underlined the importance of having all those people talking to each other. Because clearly, it's very clear that we cannot understand this text without having input from all those people, without having insight in all of these different areas into this corpus of material. So it does both, I think.
Well, I hope that I will see many of you all online again for our next showcase on February 21st, featuring Edward Triplett's Book of Fortresses and Gary Dempsey's Digital Heritage Age, that will be moderated by my wonderful committee colleague, Vicky, who will also be taking over the committee very soon. And I hope I'll get to meet some of you all in person at the Medieval Academy annual meeting coffee hour to be held on the Friday morning in Robinson Hall Lower Library. So if you're coming to the Medieval Academy's annual meeting, check your program and join us for coffee on the Friday morning. But most of all, I want to thank our wonderful presenters for their presentations today and for the amazing projects and all the impetus and innovation and drive they have given to digital humanities and medieval studies. Thanks to all of you.